I'd like to call the Joint Committee on Committee on Housing to order and the Committee on Energy and Environmental Protection. Today is Tuesday, February 15th, 2022, 10:46 a.m. We are doing this meeting via video conference, and I'm here in conference room 423. We have one bill on the agenda. It's HB 1750. We're going to ask members to testify. There's going to be a 2-minute time limit per testifier. We want to ask you to keep muted and your video off while waiting to testify and after your testimony is complete. We also, I just want to say up front that I'm inclined to defer this bill. We would like to hear all the testimony, and then we will go into discussion. Okay. So the first item again is HB 1750, makes the new construction of affordable housing eligible for exemption from environmental impact statement and environmental assessment requirements if it meets certain requirements. First up, we have Denise Iseri Matsubara from HHFDC.
Aloha and good morning, chairs, vice chairs, members of the committee. HHFDC stands on its written testimony in support. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Tom Eisen, Office of Planning and Sustainable Development.
Good morning, chairs and vice chairs. I'll be providing the testimony for the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development, and with me is Tom Eisen, our senior planner for the Environmental Review Program, which is the former OEQC office that was transferred to the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development last year. Thank you very much for that. We have testimony comments with concerns, but I want to say first, we strongly appreciate the efforts of the two committees to promote affordable housing, and we generally support bills that promote and encourage and streamline the process of making affordable housing possible. However, with this particular bill, we have several concerns that we wanted to call your attention to. The language appears to allow exemptions from an environmental assessment or impact statement for proposed affordable housing projects in the Ag District and the Conservation District, because there is no limitation on the exemption being proposed. And we believe that when proposing a housing project for the Agricultural District and the Conservation District, that environmental impact disclosure is necessary. We also note that I think it totally inadvertently, the exemption does not, is broad, and it eliminates the public disclosure elements of Chapter 343. So we do think that the requirements for public transparency are very important for environmental disclosures. Should the committee's intent be to work on the bill to allow for
okay. Can you wind down your testimony?
We'd be happy to work with the committee further. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up, we have Stephanie Sakamoto, Building Industry Association of Hawaii.
Good morning, chairs and members. Stephanie Sakamoto on behalf of BIA Hawaii will stand on our testimony in support. Available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Evan Owe, NAIOP Hawaii.
Hello, chairs, vice chairs, members of the committees. My name is Evan Owe on behalf of NAIOP Hawaii. We stand on a written comment, a written testimony in support of this measure, and will be available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have Wayne Tanaka from Sierra Club of Hawaii.
Good morning, Chair Nakamura, Chair Loa, members of the committees. The Sierra Club, we greatly appreciate the intent of this measure. However, as our written testimony in opposition describes, we are concerned about unintended and potentially avoidable consequences. I just wanted to provide one example of the kinds of project-specific impacts that can be identified by environmental review. So when they were upgrading the road going down to Hanauma Bay, there was a plan to use asphalt. And asphalt is actually quite poisonous to coral. So if they went forward with that, even though it was consistent with the county plans, that particular component could have had some pretty devastating environmental impacts, as well as impacts on a big part of our economic engine, right? So fortunately, Division of Aquatic Resources in the review of environmental assessments was able to identify that, and they were able to avoid using asphalt. And so that's just kind of one of the more granular kinds of things that environmental review can suss out from projects. And so that's why we're concerned that exemption might result in impacts that could otherwise be avoided. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. Next up is Keith Kato from the Hawaii Island Community Development Corporation. Keith, are you on the line? Okay, we'll go to the next testifier, Mia Lisa Otis.
Good
Next,
afternoon.
go ahead.
This is Mia Lisa Otis. I oppose, let me find my notes. I oppose HB 1750 and SB 3384. These bills are a land swap of ceded lands. HB 2165 wants to stop the auction process for public lands. And here we have HB 1750, which is an EIS and EA exemption for development. I wanted to just point out, speaking of agriculture, Olomana Heights in Kailua, where we have agricultural land that's being developed into multi-million-dollar homes. And then we have Punananiho, where Bellows is soon to be a land transfer. And there's just so much going on. This will infringe on what land there is left. In doing so, it could potentially dig up sacred bones and artifacts. Furthermore, the potential development will add population, creating an infrastructure that many communities cannot hold. You're enabling or selling out to investors. As they build up, our island is sinking. Stop excavating our communities. Development paints a picture of affordable, but within years, prices will go up and greedy investors will have their $1-million condos in place. As an individual in poverty, I don't buy that. This move may be for the census and votes, but the community doesn't want it. Stop the land swap payouts and corruption. There should be no exemption for affordable housing. Look at Kaka'ako too. It's, you know what it is. Keep the EIS and EA protocol. Stop the desecration and kill this bill. Mahalo.
Thank you. Next up, we have Puana Niona Sion.
All right, thank you, Chair. Onaona Thone, I'm the current chair of the Environmental Advisory Council. However, I'm offering this testimony in support in my individual capacity. I do want to note for the record that my written testimony mistakenly made reference to the Senate House Committee. However, it was intended for the House Housing Committee. Just a couple of quick comments, as detailed in my written testimony, HB 1750 seems to codify the limited affordable housing exemption that was promulgated in the new environmental impact statement rules back in 2019. However, there are two major differences. The current rule, HAR 11200.1-15, provides an exemption only for those lands that are currently classified in the urban district and already zoned for housing. So to the extent this bill moves forward, I would suggest that it be amended to be in line with the current exemption in the rules. I'm available for any questions, and thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much. And we also have next up Kanela Kamahalo Hanui Lai. Okay. Is Keith Kato still on the line? Okay, if not, we also have testimony, written testimony from 19 people opposing and 2 with comments. Are there any, is there anyone who I missed who would like to testify? Okay, we are going to then ask members if you have any questions for the testifiers on the Housing Committee side. Any questions? Okay, Chair Lowen?
EEP members, any questions? No questions here.
Okay, then we can we
wait.
just go? Oh,
Rep Hashem, go ahead. Sorry, we did have a question.
go ahead.
This would be for, I guess, Mary Alice or Denise of HHFDC. So so the way I read or listening to everybody that there is an exemption. I know there's an exemption for affordable housing on the EAs and EIS, but why is it still required for affordable housing to go through it? Why is it still required for affordable housing to go through the EIS process? There's a mismatch. Something's amiss here. And what is the trigger?
Rep Hashem, if I understand your question, the exemption in rules that were adopted in 2019 allows for an exemption for affordable housing from preparing an environmental impact statement in the urban district where the county in which the project is located has already designated the area for housing. So it's gone through community engagement and involvement. It's gone through the elected officials in that county. And so the presumption there is that the housing has already, that area has already been designated for housing. This bill would expand that exemption to the agricultural district, which doesn't allow for housing.
I'm sorry, Mary Alice. The specific question is, even though the criteria that you described, the government agencies still are requiring affordable housing, even if it's zoned for a residential or if it's apartment zone, they still require an EIS. And I think the trigger is state funds that triggers it. Even though, so if you get rental housing revolving fund, I think that's what triggers the environmental review. Is that correct, or am I missing something?
I'm gonna, Rep Hashem, may I refer that to Tom Eisen, who's the senior planner for the OEQC office? Tom, can you answer that?
Yes, thank you for the question. The trigger generally is the use of state or county lands or funds. That is the trigger that brings the action into Chapter 343. And then the issue is, how does it clear 343? And right now, the rules provide for an exemption from the erstwhile requirement to prepare an EA or EIS when these conditions are met. And the important conditions are that it's urban land use designation and there's zoning that already provides for housing. So a project is brought into the world of Chapter 343 by the use of publicly afforded, publicly provided, the lands or funds is what brings a project into Chapter 343.
So I was told that with your new rules that they should be exempt. But from what I hear, any affordable housing project that gets rental housing revolving funds or any other funds triggers 343. Is that correct?
While it triggers 343, it's eligible to be exempted from the requirement of preparing an EA. And that's some agency is able to make that determination that while it's 343 is triggered, 343 is cleared by the exemption that the agency can provide.
That exemption is if it's in urban land.
Correct.
And right now, it doesn't make that exemption for agriculture or conservation lands.
this bill removes that condition that it's only in urban lands. Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
Any
no
further?
questions. Thank you.
Any further questions?
No further questions over here.
Okay, then we can just go straight into decision making if that's okay.
Yes.
Chair Lowen. Okay, so we'd like to recommend that we defer this measure. I believe there are merits to this bill, but there's also additional safeguards that might be needed and further discussion between the author of this bill and the Environmental Council, Sierra Club, and others who have raised very important points and concerns. So I think additional discussion and education is needed on both sides to understand the frustrations of some of the very legitimate affordable housing developers in our state. And maybe we can add some more safeguards and guardrails to ensure we find some kind of middle ground moving forward. But it will take a little more discussion and education on both sides. So Chair recommends deferral. Rep. Lowen.
Thank you. And for Committee on Energy and Environmental Protection, we appreciate the discussion that happened around this. There certainly, I think, should be further discussion about how we can facilitate affordable housing development. But putting categorical exemptions in Chapter 343 is something we shouldn't take lightly and have to really consider what all the unintended consequences of it could be. So I appreciate taking more time to think about this and also recommend deferring.
Okay. So with that, this meeting is now adjourned. The Committee on Housing is called to order. Today is Tuesday, February 15th, 2022. It's 11:05 a.m. and we're doing this meeting via video conference and conference room 423 at the State Capitol. Good morning, everyone. We have 3 items for decision making. The first item is HB 2019. And the chair is recommending deferral of this bill. And instead, we want to move HB 1829, which also covers the same topic of private activity bonds. So I'm going to ask For HB 1829, I'm going to ask Vice Chair Hashimoto to describe the proposed amendment.
Thank you, Chair. So members, you can bear with me a little bit. We did pass out a proposed HD1, but there's going to be further amendments to the proposed HD1, and I'll explain it for the record. So essentially what, again, just to review, this is to give 100% of the annual state ceiling we're going to change it to the Hawaii Housing and Finance and Development Corporation to be used for housing related projects. And we're going to allow the Hawaii Housing Finance and Development Corporation, in consultation with the respective county, to allocate the following amounts for projects, HHFDC projects. So that's the change that we're going to make. It's not going directly to the county. It's just asking HHFDC to prioritize projects within those counties using this allocation. So it's going to be the amount equal to 37.55% in the annual state ceiling for housing related projects in the city and county of Honolulu. And that's the same thing. We're going to make sure that we're going to strike the 2 and put it in. So it's not giving the monies to the county. It's just for housing related projects in the county. So we're going to do that, change that for all of the items in 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is on page 4. So, and then we're also going to make sure that we're going to put that provided that the Hawaii Housing Finance and Development Corporation may accumulate each county's respective annual allocations as provided under this subsection before assigning the allocation for projects in each county. So we're changing that for projects each county, we're striking to each county. So we want to make sure that we're not giving the money to the counties, we're just making sure that it's for projects that HHFDC has allocated within that county. Any unallocated amounts under this subsection shall be allocated at the discretion of the Board of Directors of the Hawaii Housing and Finance and Development Corporation. So anything that isn't allocated, then it's up to HHFDC to then allocate. We're also on page 4, we're changing the department, which is Budget and Finance, to the Hawaii Housing and Finance Development Corporation. With the approval of the governor, may assign all or any part of the allocation of the Hawaii Housing and Finance Development Corporation to any county for housing related projects. So essentially, we're allowing HHFDC to, with the approval of the governor, to give any of their bond cap, if they have any excess bond caps, to the counties directly. And that's a little bit of a change because previously it was Budget and Finance. And at the request of the Hawaii Housing and Finance Development Corporation, any county to which any part of the allocation has been assigned under this subsection shall return all or part of the assignment, in which case the Hawaii Housing and Finance Development Corporation may provide for its reassignment. So it's all taking it from Budget and Finance and giving it to the Hawaii HHFDC. We're retaining on page 6 all of the unallocated reversion to the state. Again, we're giving that to, we're making reports required to the HHFDC rather than to the Budget and Finance Department to make sure that if they give any allocations that they are reporting directly to HHFDC. We also want to make sure that in section 5, we want to make sure we highlight that this is authorized for any project authorized but not issued before July 1st, 2022 is not affected. That should comply with the what the concerns that the Attorney General brought up with anything that was previous to July 1, 2022. So we added that section in. And then of course, this will sunset on December 31st, 2028, and everything will revert back. And so please note that date also changed. It was previously December 31st, 2027. So this will be a 6-year period instead of a 5-year period. So I think we'll also allow staff to make any technical and non-substantive revisions. So I know that was a lot. So if you have any questions,
Are there any questions, members? I would just like to say that this, I believe, is probably the most consequential bill the Housing Committee will be looking at this session. If it goes through, by just setting aside these funds for affordable housing, designating HHFDC to receive these funds, we can potentially build up to 1,640 units per year. And over 5 years, that's 8,200 units of much needed affordable housing. at 60% and below AMI. So I just want to thank Vice Chair Hashimoto for his work and diligence, because as you can see, it's a very complex piece of legislation, but very necessary. So thank you very much. Let's vote on this if there are no other questions.
All right, recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 1829 with amendments. Chair and Vice Chair vote aye. Representative Aquino is excused. Representative Clark.
Aye.
Representative Iligan.
Aye.
Representative Lopresti.
Aye.
Representative Takumi is excused, and Representative McDermott is excused. Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Well, Representative Hashimoto, I'm here too. Representative Kitagawa.
Oh, sorry, Representative Kitagawa. Representative Kitagawa, are you aye?
Aye.
Sorry about that. My fault.
Thank you. Okay, so the last piece is HB 2442 related to the building industry professionals. And I would like to propose amendments to this bill to take into account the concerns raised by the DCCA regarding the estimated amounts. And just to clarify, these amounts were based, we took the 1979 valuations for building permits, estimated cost of building improvements, renovations, and then we applied 2022 values to a 1979 number. And that's how we came up with the original numbers that has raised concerns. And so I would like to recommend cutting it in half. So for example, on page 3, line 9, it would go from 154,000 to 77,000. On page line 12, it'll go from 135,000 to 67,500. On line 19, it'll go from 193,000 to 96,500. And then on page 4, line 2, it'll go from 173,000 to 86,500. And I'd just like to clarify for members that changing these valuations does not mean that if you're below this, you don't need a building permit. You still need to follow every county's rules on what's required for a building permit. All this does is says you may not need to get a professional engineer and architect to do this work when it's a simple renovation. So it just changes the values that have been stuck in place for 40 years. So we're gonna go with these new numbers and then hopefully keep the discussion going as a way to reduce the quality, the cost of living, cost of renovating homes in Hawaii. So with that, are there any questions? Okay. Let's take the vote.
Recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 2442 with amendments, noting the excusal of Representative Aquino, Representative Takumi, and Representative McDermott. Any members voting with reservations? Any members voting no? Without others voting aye, the recommendation is adopted.
Okay, thank you, members. This